In Poughkeepsie, New York, a rail-to-trail walkway has been developed which uses a former railroad bridge. This railroad bridge was the first bridge constructed over the Hudson River and opened in 1889 by the Poughkeepsie Highland Railroad. It carried freight and passengers between Boston, New York, Harrisburg, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. At its peak, the bridge handled 3,500 rail cars a day. The railroad bridge sustained fatal damage due to a fire on May 8, 1974. A Penn Central freight train with more than 100 cars crossed the bridge, and a spark from the train's brakes started the fire. From the bridge, train watchers can see freight trains moving down the west side of the Hudson River. Passenger trains usually run along the east side of the river. The bridge is 6,738 feet long, 25 feet wide, and 212 feet above the Hudson River, and is the longest pedestrian bridge. It was estimated that it would cost more than $50 million to demolish the bridge. With the help of private and public funds, $38.8 million was raised to restore the bridge as a pedestrian bridge. During World War II, the bridge was painted black in order to make it less visible in the event of an attack. It opened on October 3, 2009, and on July 4, 2011, it celebrated the 1 millionth visitor. As the Coast Guard boat moves up the Hudson River, a lone seagull acts as a sentinel, keeping an eye on the boat. In Kingston, New York, 2 locomotives pull a 143-car train. We don't usually show an entire train on this show, but this time we will. Notice the large variety of rail cars. There are many boxcars, some from Maine, tank cars with petroleum, cars loaded with lumber, grain cars, gondolas, corn syrup tank cars, flat cars, containers, and coal cars. This type of freight train will weigh an average of 12 million pounds. When traveling at 55 miles per hour, it would take this train a mile or more to stop. Each loaded car can weigh as much as an average house. Wheels have a surface contact with the rails of 3/4 of an inch, about the size of a dime. The small contact with the track is what makes the train so efficient. There's very little friction. Very little friction is also what makes it difficult for a train to stop quickly. The Wilbur Railroad Bridge in Kingston, New York crosses 150 feet above Rondout Creek. The bridge was completed in 1902 and is 900 feet long, about a quarter of a mile. There is a 400-foot tunnel at one end of the bridge. This train route along the Hudson River was a very popular excursion route in the early 1900s. It took tourists from New York City to lake, river, mountain, and seaside resorts in upper New York. This part of the trip through Kingston was especially beautiful because of the view from the train at the higher elevations. These colorful containers are bringing goods from all over the world. In New Baltimore, New York, the Train Time team catches this auto-rack train in 2 locations. The train is heading for the hump yard in Selkirk. These long trains of auto racks run daily from the automakers in Michigan to destinations here in the east. Thousands of new cars are transported daily. At another location in New Baltimore, we see the auto rack train again. The long train is slowing down because it is nearing the Selkirk Yard. The train stops outside the yard's approach as workers use welding equipment to repair some rail. From the Route 9W bridge over the rails, one videographer gets the top view while the other videographer gets a view from the ground level. As the auto racks move into the yard, another train is moving out of the yard. The train moving out of the yard waits for clearance before he can continue his trip. This hump yard is located about 15 miles south of Albany, New York. The dimensions of the Selkirk Yard show it as 6 miles long and 1 mile wide. Selkirk has 11 receiving tracks for trains entering the yard from the west or from New England. At the hump yard in Selkirk, entire trains are pushed up an incline so that cars can be uncoupled and rolled downhill into the bowl of the classification yard. The hump is 26 feet high with a tunnel under it for automobiles and trains to pass through.
That's great.
The Selkirk Yard was originally opened on November 20, 1924. In 1966, New York Central reconstructed the yard and installed one of the first computer-operated freight car classification yards. The computers use the car's weight, size, and distance the car has to go into the classification yard, and sets switches and car retarders to get the proper slow speed to get the car into the proper track. The classification yard has 70 tracks with a capacity of more than 3,500 rail cars. When the yard was opened with the use of the computer, 2,300 cars a day could be sorted and classified. The pin puller lifts the coupler pin, which allows the cars to separate at the top of the hump. The yard operates day and night, with trains being constantly reclassified efficiently. Rail cars are taken from the classification yard and made up into trains on 13 departure tracks. Another unit is leaving the tower to go to the receiving yard and start pushing another string of cars over the hump. The retarders squeeze against the wheels of the car to slow it down or stop it completely if needed. The engineer waits to be sure there are no cars coming through the tunnel before entering it. This modern-looking 6,400 square foot building is the result of a rehabilitation project completed in March of 2004 by the Capital District Transportation Authority of New York. The station is on the Empire Corridor in New York and handles 24,000 passengers a year. Most of the passengers are headed to New York City. Saratoga and North Creek Alco B39-8E, locomotive number 8524, appears to be painted in the attractive Delaware and Hudson paint scheme. The Arizona Eastern Railroad locomotive is an EMD E8, formerly owned by the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. The Saratoga and North Creek excursion trains started running in July of 2011. The excursion is a 57-mile scenic trip through the upper Hudson River Valley from Saratoga Springs to North Creek in New York. Special trains are also run during the year. This is the Polar Express train scheduled for after dark. The popular children's book Polar Express will be read to guests in the dome car during the nighttime excursion. Amtrak trains 68 and 69 cover the 381 miles between New York City and Montreal in about 10 hours. Trains run daily in both directions and have 18 station stops between Penn Station in New York and Montreal.
Ladies and gentlemen, Amtrak Train 69 will be arriving in just a few moments. I ask all passengers to start heading out to the platform at this time. It was originally scheduled 11:57 arrival from Penn Station in Albany. We continue service to Fort Edward, Whitehall, Fort Tycon Road, Fort Henry, Westport, Plattsburgh, Rouse's Point, St. Lambert, and Montreal. I do ask that all passengers please head on out to the platform for Train 69. Although I do ask that you please not go close to the tracks. Wait for the train to come to a complete stop before approaching.
Outside the village of Fonda, train 252, a mixed train of general merchandise, heads east. Following the mixed train is a train of construction dirt-filled hopper cars. In the village of Fonda, we wait for Amtrak Train 283, which is one of the passenger trains in Amtrak's New York Empire service between New York City and Niagara Falls. We hope you've enjoyed seeing these trains in several locations in the state of New York. Thank you for watching.